deal to me.
Great. Well, that actually transitions to my next question, which I was so as you know, as you can probably tell, agriculture doesn't have a huge presence in my district. We have actually some ag tech companies. We have some research, like any district. We have some farm.
We will leave this Rules Committee hearing on farm programs at this point to go live now to the U.S. Senate, gaveling back in for more debate on the government shutdown.
America, for the President of the United States to be the headliner. Instead, the President of China, President Xi, became the headliner. And there was questions asked as to whether America was open for business. We've been hurt by this shutdown. Make no mistake about it. Our economy has suffered. And just the threat of defaulting or not paying our bills has hurt consumer confidence. Consumer confidence is whether consumers are ready to go out and buy that car, buy that home, go on that vacation. After the attack on our country on September the 11th, consumer confidence dropped by about 8.8%. I could go over other moments in history, but the debt ceiling debate today is about twice as damaging to consumer confidence than the 9/11 attack. So we are hurting our country. We are hurting our economy. We are wasting taxpayer dollars. We all talk about dealing with the debt. We're talking about paying our bills when we talk about raising the debt ceiling. This money has already been incurred. We're just paying our bills. But the government shutdown, we've wasted over $2 billion of taxpayer money as a result of the shutdown. And as the presiding officer knows, this region, Maryland, Virginia, the district, we have over 300,000 federal workers who are on furlough of the 800,000 that are furloughed in this country. That has a direct impact on families as well as our economy. These federal workers are not buying in their local shops, are not eating in the local restaurants. I was stopped for a sandwich over the last weekend and went into a store. I said, "How are things going?" A restaurant to get a sandwich. The shop owner said, "Terrible. Social Security employees aren't here. I can't keep my business open without their business." So we've seen the direct impact, and I've tried to put faces on the numbers because we could talk about the statistics and the numbers. When we talk about the individual people that we hear from, I know the presiding officer has gotten calls from his constituents in Virginia, the same stories. We brought in over a week ago Amy Fritz, who works at NOAA. She's a federal worker who was furloughed. She tracks weather conditions, a pretty important position that she does. She was telling the hardship to her family. Well, the Baltimore Sun reported today that at NOAA, it's not just the federal workers, it's the contract workers who are suffering. And they pointed out the example of Tiffany House, a person who lives in Hyattsville, Maryland. She's a single mom. She's a contract employee at NOAA who's been laid off, furloughed, as a result of the government shutdown. So it's more than just the 800,000 federal workers. We've got the contract workers who have been laid off as a result. And she said even though we are furloughed, we're not getting paid. The bills keep coming. There are a lot of families that live paycheck to paycheck. 11 days into this government shutdown, families are wondering what they're going to do in paying their bills. Some parents talked about Keith Tate from Hyattsville. He works for FM Talent Source. It's located in Silver Springs, Maryland. Almost 30% of their contract employees, 92 in total number, have been laid off. Now, he was starting to work on October 1st. His luck. He was looking forward to it. He went to work on October 1st, but then got furloughed as a result of the government shutdown. And the effect goes well beyond just individual people that you would expect. I have a friend Hugh Sisson, who started Heavy Seas Brewery in Baltimore. It's one of these microbreweries. He's doing a great job hiring people. Now, how does he get directed? You may say, well, sale beers down. No, it's worse than that. The Alcohol, Tobacco, Tax, and Trade Bureau The employees there have been furloughed that have to approve new formulas or labels. Now, as you know, microbreweries need to have a fresh product. They're being hurt all over the nation as a result of that agency not being in business. So, Mr. President, this shutdown is hurting our economy, hurting our country, hurting individuals, hurting taxpayers, hurting businesses. We can do much better than that. In my state of Maryland, 10% of our workforce works for the federal government. The agencies are important to the work. As I pointed out previously, Harbor Point, which is one of the most important economic developments in downtown Baltimore. It's a RCRA site, which means it requires the consent of government, EPA, in order to move forward with the economic development. Well, the people at EPA that would approve this project have been furloughed. This economic project now is on hold. And I could mention other examples of agencies that are critically important to move forward. And I could also talk about a lot more private employment. We talked about it's not just government employment, it's private employment. Convergence Technology Consulting, located in Glen Burnie, Maryland, does cloud computing services for the Department of Defense. 20% of their 65 employees have been laid off. TW Corporation in Hanover, Maryland, does cybersecurity work. 1/3 of their 700 employees were furloughed. And the list goes on and on and on, the damage being caused by the government shutdown. So my message is pretty simple. We've got to make sure that government is open. We've got to make sure that we open government, we pay our bills. And I understand that we would like to have an agreement on a budget. I would like to have an agreement on a budget. For 6 months, we've been trying to go to conference. The Senate passed the budget. The House passed the budget. They're different. They're different. The Senate budget, one that I supported, presiding officer supported, would provide more resources into job growth by investing in infrastructure, by investing in education, by investing in research. And yes, we do provide more revenues by closing tax loopholes. We also start to rein in government spending, continue to do that. The House-passed budget has less of those investments, doesn't close up the loopholes in our tax code, and that's what we got to negotiate between Democrats and Republicans. That's what we need to do. But the first order of business is to open government, pay our bills, and then let's sit down and negotiate. We can't wait. We've got to have government open. I've quoted before from the Baltimore Sun their analogy of negotiations. It's difficult when you haven't really when this is all one-sided. And some paper said, so I quote, "So when Speaker Boehner lashes out at President Obama for failing to negotiate, one has to ask, what is this thing he describes as negotiations? House Republicans are not merely leveraging their political position, some dryly claim. They are threatening to do grievous harm to the global economy and the American public. The gun isn't raised to Mr. Obama's head or the Senate's. The Democrats have no particular stake in passing a continuing resolution or raising the debt ceiling other than keeping public order and doing what any reasonable person expects Congress to do. No, the gun is raised at the nation as a whole. That's why descriptions like ransom and hostage are not mere hyperboles. They're as close as the English language gets to accurately describing the GOP strategy." So our message is clear to Speaker Boehner: put down the gun. Put it down. Open government. Allow us to pay our bills. And yes, we want to sit down and work out our differences. Let the democratic process proceed. Open government, pay our bills, and let's negotiate a fair agreement. With that, Mr. President, I would suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. Hang on.
Senator from Louisiana.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have suggest we disperse with the quorum call.
Without objection, the quorum call be suspended.
Thank you. I have one unanimous consent request for a committee to meet during today's session of the Senate. It's been approved by the majority and minority leaders. I ask unanimous consent that this request be agreed to and it be printed in the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to speak for about 10 minutes. I understand there may be other senators coming to the floor and wanted to just express my concerns over a few issues that are really important to the people of Louisiana. I understand that the meeting with the President and the Republicans in the Senate, our friends, has just concluded. I'm hoping that there will be some positive steps forward from that meeting so that we can open this government, remove the threat of an economic collapse, and get to the bargaining table where we've been trying to get to literally for 6 months. We voted 21 times in the Senate to get to the negotiating table in the budget conference, which is the first starting point to agree on numbers and revenues and spending limits. And then, of course, as an appropriator, I would know this as chair of the Appropriations Committee, the next step in regular order is for each individual committee to then negotiate with our Republican counterparts about how we allocate the money given to us through that budget process. None of that has been able to happen, Mr. President, none. Not because Democrats have been unwilling to go to the negotiating table, but because some friends on the other side have taken hostage innocent federal employees, the economy generally, and demanded things that are way beyond their ability to use their political leverage. And so instead of using it correctly, they've held innocents hostage. And it's very, very troubling and I think very wrong, and hopefully we're going to find a way forward. But I wanted to spend my time this afternoon talking about a couple of things that the people I'm hearing about from Louisiana. Like, could you all get back to work? Because we have some serious problems that need to be solved. And one of them, Mr. President, maybe your state is being affected by this because you have a coastal area, as we do, is fixing this very broken flood insurance system. It's referred to at home in our state as Biggert Waters, named after the two members of Congress that led this, quote, reform effort. Maxine Waters has subsequently completely disassociated herself with the legislation and said that, you know, it wasn't the right thing to do. She has made several public statements. She has urged herself as the leader in the House with Republicans and Democrats to get this fixed. I can tell you, the people of Louisiana, this is our #1 problem and challenge right now, because the federal government a year and a half ago passed a law that was supposed to cure something, but the cure is worse than the disease. The cure was worse than the disease. The disease is that we had a flood insurance program that had spent more money than it had taken in, and yes, premiums were probably too low to sustain the program, but it was giving people at least some option and hope when they had a flood to get some of their equity in their home protected and recovered. This bill came along, never debated on the Senate floor, stuck in a conference committee report, and now it's being implemented, and Mr. President, it is a disaster. We have 400,000 flood insurance policies in Louisiana. Texas has 700,000. Florida has over 2 million. Pennsylvania has over 75,000. Virginia probably has close to 40 to 50,000. I don't have all of my list in front of me. And the problem is that the law that passed had a stated one goal, to make the program sustainable, but it left out the second or the equally important aspect, to make it affordable. So you can sustain a program all day long, but if nobody can afford to be in it, A, how long will it sustain itself? Not long at all. And B, you're hurting the people that you're trying to help the most. So a group of us have been working on fixing this now for quite some time, and these new regulations went into effect October 1st. So we're now 11 or 12 days, I forget the date, but we're somewhere past the 1st of October. These new rates have gone in. Some people are seeing rates quadrupling or tenfold, going up from, you know, $300 a year to $3,000 a year. Or in some cases we've heard of $1,500 to $30,000. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. I'm not making this up. This is all in the record. So we have a way to fix it, and the good news I wanted to say on the floor today is that we had 24 senators, Republicans and Democrats, come together this week and send a dear colleague letter to our leadership, to the Republican leadership and to the House leadership, to say that we're very close to a compromise that will do two things. It will give us time to get the affordability study that was supposed to be done actually done, allow FEMA potentially with some oversight from Congress to set rates that would keep the program functioning but not jeopardize people's equity in their home. It would, of course, remove the automatic trigger provision that has been very detrimental in the law, which basically says your rates can stay low, but the minute you sell your house or the minute you put your house for sale, whatever grandfathered rate you had is gone, and you don't go up 25% a year, you go up to where you should be, and sometimes that's moving from $1,000 a year to $30,000 a year. It makes your house worthless, and that's what's happening to thousands of people. They have lost equity in their home. It's one of many problems this Congress has to face. We can't fix any of them if we can't get back to work. And if we can't get the officials back to work that are working at FEMA that have been laid off. So one point I want to make today, and if I exceed my time, I don't see anyone else, I'll ask for a few extra minutes. One point I want to make today is let's find a way forward to negotiate, and I hope part of the negotiation could potentially be a fix to Biggert Waters. I want to thank Senator Merkley from Oregon, Senator Menendez from New Jersey, Senator Wicker from Mississippi, Senator Vitter from Louisiana. Senator Isaacson has been giving us some good input, etc. I want to thank the realtors and the bankers because they realized we had made a mistake, that the law that we passed was not a good one. Sometimes that happens, and so we've got to fix it, maybe, we don't have to fix maybe the whole part of it, but we're working on some pieces that must be amended so that it accomplishes the goal of having a program that the taxpayers do not have to pick up a big tab every year, but that allows real estate markets to function, people to be able to retain equity in their home and to pay their fair share, and also encourage smart growth and development. And very importantly also, which is part of the problem with Biggert Waters, the bill, the old bill, the bill we're trying to fix, didn't even recognize levees. I don't know if you have a lot of levees, Mr. President, in Virginia, but we have to have them in Louisiana because we are below sea level, and we've been that way for 300 years. I mean, we moved there below sea level. We had to be there to create the Port of New Orleans. Thomas Jefferson leveraged the whole federal treasury to buy us for, I think, 3 cents an acre, if I remember correctly, the bulk of 19 states. It was the greatest real estate purchase in the history of our country. Alaska may argue, but we think the Louisiana Territory is equally as valuable, if not more, and our state's proud to carry that name. People understand the history of this. So why would Thomas Jefferson leverage the whole, treasury of the United States to buy something that wasn't worthwhile? Of course it's worthwhile. It was worthwhile then. It is worthwhile now. And people live there because we run the biggest port system in the world, and we need to continue to live there with all the industries, oil and gas, fisheries, etc. So this bill, this Biggert Waters bill, undermines our region's ability to function. And we produce 17% of the GDP for the country. So this is not a small parochial issue. So the southern states, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, etc., but it also affects interior states. You saw what happened in Colorado. You've seen what's happened in the East Coast states with New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, etc. So let's get to the negotiating table. Let's work together as we know that we can, and let's put on the top of that agenda a potential fix for Biggert Waters. And again, I thank my colleagues for working so cordially together, even in this difficult time. Let me move to another subject for a minute and put into the record in the event that my colleagues, do I have to ask for an additional 3 minutes?
Without objection.
Thank you. Let me put into the record in the event that my colleagues did not, a letter that I received, and I think all the members received a copy of a letter that went to Senator Reid, Senator McConnell, Speaker Boehner, and Representative Pelosi from the Governors Association that came yesterday. Governor Mary Phelan and Governor John Hickenlooper signed the letter on behalf of all the governors, and it says, the nation's governors urge Congress and the administration to quickly reopen the federal government. The fiscal health of states is inextricably linked to the fiscal stability of the federal government. And while state economies have improved, a failure by our national government to secure a solution to the current budget issue undermines our state's recovery and endangers the U.S. economy. It goes on to say that states have so far, now 10 days or so into this shutdown, managed to avoid closing or suspending most programs and services by using carryover funds, but they say in some cases by using state spending to fill in missing federal dollars. However, states are not in a position to be the bank for the federal government. And as a former governor, of course, you understand this. I was a former treasurer. I most certainly understand that the budget of Louisiana is about almost 70% federal funding. So when the federal government cuts that funding off, it starts to really affect the way states and the 300-plus cities in my state operate, and our private sector partners that work with us to provide state-level and community services, and nonprofits like Catholic Charities, who's running some of our low-income housing, our justice programs for in some of our neighborhoods and communities. So this shutdown, it's just bad. It's bad all around. It should not have happened, and we need to get this government open and operating, not only to help our states and their economic, recovery plans, to start focusing on fixing things that we need to fix, like Biggert Waters and repealing that old insurance reform bill and find a better way forward. And I might also want to mention just two other things quickly. What is also happening in our state today, I've got news this morning, is that permitting in the Gulf of Mexico for offshore oil and gas drilling, Mr. President, is now shut down. Right at the time when America is about to overtake Russia as the largest domestic producer of gas and oil, right when we're about to take first place, the Republicans' Tea Party has shut the government down and shut down permitting in the Gulf. We've been fighting ever since the Deepwater Horizon to get that back up and going. Now we find it's shut down again. The people I represent can't take another shutdown of permitting. We have levees to build. We have a big problem in our river parishes, we call them, along Lake Pontchartrain. We've got Morganza to the Gulf, which is a very important levee project for Houma, one of the centers for oil and gas production that helps not just the people of Houma in Terrebonne Parish, but our whole region and the whole country, because that's sort of like the little Houston, if you will. Houma is like a little Houston. We don't have all of the corporate structures there, but we have all of the know-how and goods and services and the providers and the boats and the planes and the ships and the helicopters. They might have the gleaming office towers in Houston, but we have a lot of the hard workers right there in Houma. The levee that protects them and their homes is now basically the plans for it shut down along with this Tea Party shutdown. It is time to open our government, get back to work, solve real problems, and negotiate in good faith without taking innocents hostage. And too many innocents, whether it's children with cancer, whether it's business people that have put everything on the line for their business and at no fault of their own now have no customers coming in the front door, can't pay their note, and the banks aren't going to wait until we get our act together. So I thank you, Mr. President. Wanted to mention this, and in 1 minute, if I could just take 1 more minute to speak on behalf of people that don't have a senator here, and that is the District of Columbia. The District of Columbia is technically not a part of the federal government. They're not an agency of the federal government. They're not a department of the federal government. They are the district where the federal government resides, and they, contrary to popular belief, raise most of their money through their own tax revenue generated, about 75% local. 25% of the budget of the District of Columbia, which is about 750,000 people, a pretty big city as cities go, come from the people that live here. And they have been caught up as if they were an agency of the federal government. And on their behalf, let me just argue to my colleagues or suggest that that's a group of innocents, a city. You know, Baltimore's budget is not shut down. Richmond's budget is not shut down. The New Orleans budget is not shut down. Chicago's budget is not shut down. New York's budget is not shut down. San Francisco's budget is not shut down. But D.C. government is shut down because of this threat. They've gotten caught up. They should be let go. And we can then negotiate on all other things. So I think the President understands this. I know that Majority Leader Reid understands this. I'm hoping that Minority Leader Mitch McConnell will give his support so that this can be done in a bipartisan way, recognizing this is the nation's capital, not asking for them for any special preference, just allowing them to use their own money and operate their own city while we try to figure out how to get the rest of the government open and operating. And I hope that we can do that today. We've been working across the lines. I want to thank the Congresswoman Eleanor Norton-Holmes for her leadership on this, but, you know, they don't have senators, so a few of us have to stand up and speak for the people of the district, and I'm happy to try to do that on occasion when I, of course, believe strongly in what they're asking for. So I thank the President, and I yield the floor.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
President.
Senator from Vermont.
I ask that the quorum call be vitiated and ask unanimous consent to speak up to 20 minutes.
Without objection, the quorum call is suspended. And without objection, 20 minutes allowed.
Mr. President, it is no secret to anybody that the American people are frustrated and they are disgusted with what is going on in Washington. You may have seen the Onion magazine, the satirical magazine, running a story which said that at a time when 5% of the American people approve of what's going on in Congress, the Onion reported psychiatrists deeply worried about the mental health of 5% of the American public. In other words, all over this country, regardless of political persuasions, people literally cannot understand what's going on here, and they have every reason to be outraged and frustrated because so many people today are being hurt. We can disagree about the Affordable Care Act. We as a nation can disagree about how you address Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, global warming, or any other issue out there. But what should not be happening is that this government and the American people should not be held hostage by an extreme right wing of the Republican Party who says, well, yeah, we lost the election by 5 million votes. We lost 2 seats in the Senate. We lost seats in the House. But nonetheless, unless we get the agenda that we campaigned on and that we lost, we're going to shut down the federal government, punish millions of federal employees and tens of millions of taxpayers who paid for federal services. And for the first time in the history of the United States of America, we are not going to pay our bills and perhaps thrust the American financial system and the world's financial system into a horrendous recession. What the American people are saying over and over again, regardless of political persuasion, yes, we can disagree on issues. No, you cannot bring the United States government to a halt and default on our payment because you disagree on certain legislation. Now, interestingly enough, Mr. President, a couple of days ago, I gathered that we had to bring the government to a halt and that we had to not pay our bills and bring the world's financial system into crisis because of the horrors of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. That was the reason. Well, 2 days have come and gone, and guess what? It's not the Affordable Care Act. That is not any longer being discussed. Today, I gather, I haven't seen the news in the last 15 minutes, but the last that I heard, the reason that we are shutting down the government and threatening not to pay our bills is that we are spending too much money and the deficit is too high. I gather that is the latest reason. Well, clearly, a deficit of $700 billion and a debt of $16.7 trillion is too much. But let's make a couple of points about that issue. First, in the last 3 years, we have cut the deficit in half. A few years ago it was $1.4 trillion. Today it is $700 billion. That is not an insignificant effort. Second, and perhaps most importantly, we have got to understand how we have got to where we are in terms of the debt and in the deficit. Mr. President, do we have a large deficit because we are spending too much on Social Security? Well, actually not, because Social Security is independently funded through the payroll tax and hasn't added 1 nickel to the deficit. So it's not Social Security. We could talk about Medicare and Medicaid in a moment, but the reason we have seen a spike in the deficit in recent years has to do with the fact that many of my deficit hawk Republican friends and some Democrats voted for the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, but they forgot to pay for that war. Just a slip, they just forgot about it. And that war, those wars are going to cost between $3 and $6 trillion. So I want everybody to remember, great deficit hawks who are busy trying to cut every program that working families in this country need, forgot to pay for wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that will cost between $3 and $6 trillion. Second issue is our great deficit hawks had no problem during the Bush era of giving huge tax breaks to the wealthiest people in this country. And thirdly, of course, as a result of deregulation and the greed and recklessness and illegal behavior on Wall Street brought us to a financial collapse and a recession, with the result that revenue substantially declined. Now, I raised those issues, giving a little bit of history about how we got into the deficit today, because now I guess Congressman Ryan and others have decided that the reason we shut down the government is not because of Obamacare, it is because there is too much spending. And what that translates into is their desire to cut Social Security, to cut Medicare, to cut Medicaid, and to cut other vitally important programs for the middle class and working families of this country. But, Mr. President, before we talk about the pain that would be caused by making savage cuts in Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, it's important to put this discussion in a broader context. If you go out to the American people, I suspect the people in Virginia and the people in Vermont and people all over this country, and if you look at virtually every single poll that has been done in recent years asking the American people what they consider to be the most important issues facing them, you know what they say? They say the deficit is important. But what is much more important is the issue of high unemployment and the economy in general. That is what every single poll shows. And the American people are right. Deficit is important. What is even more important is addressing the reality of our workforce. If you count those people who have given up looking for work and are working part-time, almost 14% of our workforce today is unemployed. And what the American people are saying to Congress, create jobs, deal with unemployment. Mr. President, the other issue out there that all across this country people are deeply worried about is that most of the new jobs that are being created, and this has been the case for a number of years now, that most of the new jobs being created are part-time, low-wage jobs. How is somebody supposed to survive working for $10 an hour and getting 25 hours a week of work? You can't do it. And we're seeing more and more of those types of jobs in the economy, and by the way, jobs that provide little or no benefits. And what the American people are saying is raise the minimum wage. I can't remember what the last poll was, but surely more than 70% of the American people have said a minimum wage of $7.25 an hour is a starvation wage. We need to raise the minimum wage. Mr. President, anybody who has kids in college today understands that it is harder and harder for working class and middle class families to send their kids to college. And what the American people are saying to us, do something. You tell us what is true is that it's hard to make it into the middle class unless kids have a college education. Well, do something to make college affordable. Don't have my kid leaving college or graduate school $50,000 in debt or $80,000 in debt. Do something about that. And, Mr. President, anybody who drives anywhere in America, in Vermont or in Indiana or any place else, understands that our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, wastewater plants, water plants, our rail system is deteriorating rapidly. And they say, do something about the infrastructure. And people are telling us that as global warming is perceived as more and more of a crisis, do something about energy efficiency. Why are we emitting greenhouse gas emissions into the air when we could be a much more energy efficient country? And on it goes. The American people are hurting, and they want us to address their problems. The other point that needs to be made is that when we talk about the financial and economic problems facing this country, it is terribly important to take an overview of what's going on in the economy in general. And there is no debate about this. The middle class in America today is disappearing. Median family income today is less than it was 24 years ago. Despite all of the increase in productivity and technology, median family income is less today than it was 24 years ago. That's rather extraordinary. We have 46.5 million people in this country living in poverty, more than at any time in the history of this country. 22.5% of our kids live in poverty. That is the highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world. Poverty among senior citizens is increasing. So we have major economic challenges that we face. Now, our Republican friends, who a few days ago were telling us that they had to shut down the government and threaten not to pay our bills because of the horrors of Obamacare, now apparently no longer concerned about Obamacare, and they are now concerned about the national debt, and they're concerned about our spending. Well, this is what I want to say. If we want to have a conversation or a conference or a discussion or a special committee, or call it whatever you want, we cannot just look at cutting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, as Congressman Ryan and many others want. We have got to put into that discussion how it happens that 1 out of 4 major corporations in this country does not pay a nickel in federal income taxes. You think that should be part of the discussion? I think it should be. We have to put into that discussion how it happens that corporate America is putting their money in the Cayman Islands and in other tax havens and avoiding paying tens and tens of billions of dollars in federal taxes. Do we need that into the discussion? I think we do. And if you're going to talk about a conference on the economy, the conference must include the need to create millions of jobs. It must include the need to raise the minimum wage. It must include pay equity so that women get the same wages that men do for the work they are doing. It must include rebuilding our infrastructure. This discussion on the economy cannot simply happen on Republican terms. We live in a country in which the middle class is in rapid decline, while the wealthiest people and the largest corporations are doing phenomenally well. And any discussion that we have after we reopen the government, after we pay our bills, has got to include that important reality. We cannot and we must not, for moral reasons and for economic reasons, balance the budget on the backs of the elderly, the children, the sick, and low-income people. The wealthiest people and the largest corporations have got to get involved, have got to pay their fair share of taxes. And we have got to create the millions of jobs that this country desperately needs. So, Mr. President, as I see the revolving or constantly changing agenda on the part of my Republican colleagues as to why they have shut down the government, I just want to make it clear that the first thing that has to happen is they have to understand this government has got to be reopened, and it's got to be reopened with a strong budget that lasts for the rest of this fiscal year. And we have got to pay our debts so that this country and the entire global economy does not descend into financial chaos. We have got to do that, and in fact, if Mr. Boehner were to give the members of the House of Representatives a vote on that issue today, I expect it would win. But as we go forward and we discuss broader issues, as we should, the agenda cannot simply be the agenda of the Republican candidate for president and vice president who lost by 5 million votes. The agenda has got to be what the American people want, and that is expanding the middle class, creating jobs, raising wages, rebuilding our infrastructure, pay equity, making college affordable. Those are the issues that have got to be on the agenda as well. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
President. The senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, I ask consent the call of the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
You know, Mr. President, my friends in Vermont watch what's going on, and it's hard to explain it to them, especially people who are hardworking, rely one way or the other on government programs, and they don't come through. And I know it was in the press today about the polls saying how angry people are at the small group in the other body that have held things up. And I understand that. It is probably difficult for those people who work hard every single day, pay their bills, trust in their government, and then see what's happening. I appreciated the meeting with the President yesterday. The distinguished presiding officer was there. I know how much President Obama wants to have the shutdown end, have people go back to work, have the United States pay its bills, and I agree with him. I think the vast majority of Americans agree with him. Now he's got to get a tiny minority in the Congress to agree with him. It is unfortunate. It is unfortunate that they do not. Because ultimately we should be serving the best interests of our country, not what might work at a Tea Party rally or a fundraiser to get one's face on television. You know, I'll give you an example. When September 30th came and went, it wasn't just the federal government that shut down. The Farm Bill extension also expired. Now, I can speak to this in some sense of knowledge how that works. I've been able to serve on the Senate Agriculture Committee for 38 years. I served as chair of it. We have a superb chair now in Debbie Stabenow. But I've seen both Republicans and Democrats in that committee traditionally over the years come together, work closely together. I think of two people who were the nominees of their parties for president, miles apart in political philosophy. Senator George McGovern, a Democrat, Senator Robert Dole, Bob Dole, a Republican. One a liberal Democrat, the other conservative Republican, but on the Farm Bill, on the nutrition programs, they worked closely together for what was best for Americans and best for the country. But because we refused to go through, and we had passed an excellent farm bill, a bipartisan farm bill, in this body, in the Senate, because the other body would not take it up and either pass it or vote to improve it, the Farm Bill extension expired, and the 1-2 punch of political reality is needlessly harming our nation. It's leaving farmers with great uncertainty about the future of vital farm programs, all the while with no staff at USDA to answer their questions. Now, I know the distinguished presiding officer has a lot of agriculture in his state. His state's much larger than ours, but we also have a lot of agriculture in the state of Vermont. And they're saying, why is the basic, essential responsibility of Congress to fund the government, why has that been ignored? Regular business has been replaced by bumper sticker politics. And the shutdown is, and was, entirely avoidable. It's perpetuated by the reckless leadership of the House that's willing to imperil the economy and negatively impact every single American family. Now, they're not asking for compromise. The compromise has already happened here in the Senate. We conceded to the House terms. We adopted, and Leader Reid, Harry Reid, had to fight to get the votes to give the House what they had asked for by adopting an appropriations bill at the funding level the House wanted. But even though he had been told by the House leadership that would get us back, that would have the government stay open, after we did it, they said, oops, we changed our mind. They moved the goalposts again. You cannot run government like that. That's by whim. That's not by commitment. That's by changing your views by the moment. It's not by keeping your word. Anyone claiming that the Senate has been unwilling to compromise has conveniently ignored the fact the Senate came forward and pass a continuing resolution at the level the House requested. So I'm like the American people. I'm certainly like my fellow Vermonters. I'm tired of having our political process obstructed. It's time to reopen the government for business. Stop the silly season. Stop the games. Stop rushing to the TV cameras to get your face on there and say, I am the only person saving America as I try to destroy America. Let's reopen. For the farmers in Vermont who have found their local USDA offices dark, they know the shutdown is even more troubling because it's diverted attention away from the now expired Farm Bill. This manufactured crisis is making it next to impossible to reach compromise on the important agriculture and rural development and nutrition legislation. The bipartisan Senate Farm Bill would provide $25 billion in savings. This is the bill that both Republicans and Democrats voted for in the Agriculture Committee and on this floor. $25 billion in savings that could be applied toward reducing the federal government. But instead, the House forced us into the shutdown, which is costing the federal government hundreds of millions of dollars a day, $1.6 billion a week for nothing. So they can go on television and say, look at us, rally to us because we're standing for America. No, you're costing American taxpayers $1.6 billion a week. That's just straight into the taxpayers. But more and more the damage of the government shutdown is spreading across the nation, in every city, in every community. With each passing day, the state governments, local governments feel the pinch and may go bankrupt. We heard last week that the CME Group, the world's largest future exchange, informed their customers that the shutdown and the USDA furloughs could affect dairy and livestock contracts. And while much of Wall Street is worried they won't have the Bureau of Labor Statistics employment numbers this month on Main Street and on our nation's farms and agriculture business, the concerns are growing about missing agricultural pricing information. That impacts dairy and livestock future contracts and options for milk, cheese, butter, and other dairy products. And while that may sound esoteric to some, if you're one of those farmers that gets up before dawn, works hard all day long until after dark, 7 days a week, paying your bills, paying your mortgage, being an integral part of the community, this is real. Farmers are doing their work and their job. We ought to do ours. Let me give you one example of the uncertainty the shutdowns imposing on farmers and businesses from coast to coast. Vermont's own Cabot Creamery Cooperative makes some of Vermont's most award-winning cheeses could be hit by the missing pricing information. In recent years, Cabot, being good business people, they've increased use of futures contracts as an active part of its risk management efforts. It makes sense. We've seen many farmers and food companies and dairy cooperatives across the country do the same after the disastrous collapse in milk prices in 2009. But the USDA staff is furloughed, and farmers and businesses like Cabot can no longer have the daily and weekly reports on cash prices for agriculture products. These are the benchmarks for these futures contracts are used to hedge against risk and big price swings. To make matters worse, the entire USDA website is shut down. So that's keeping farmers from seeing and using previous agriculture reports from the agency. This, to these same people who are working these long, long hours, they're obeying the rules, they're doing what's expected of them, but suddenly they're having legs taken out from under them. I've heard from the Vermont Economic Development Authority, we call it VEDA. It's Vermont's statewide economic development finance lender. They're focused on supporting Vermont industrial and commercial and agriculture enterprises. nearly their entire agricultural loan portfolio, which is $70 million. Probably not much in some states, a lot in my little state. It intersects in some way with USDA. And their ability to service current loans or work on new agricultural loans is quickly freezing up. The list is growing for the number of customers that are going to be locked out in the cold because the shutdown is quickly causing the whole agricultural lending scene to seize up. I'm hearing from our apple growers in Vermont. Now, you have a very short harvest this time of the year in Vermont. It's fall harvest, and then it snows. They're in the middle of a fantastic, long-awaited harvest. So they have to keep one eye on the weather forecast and how their crops are doing, and the other eye on the Department of Labor to ensure that their apple harvest workforce, which is a seasonal workforce, will actually be there. Many of our farms use the federal H-2A temporary worker program. And I'm starting to hear a litany of problems due to the Tea Party shutdown of the federal government. Farmers are unable to get their workers' required Social Security numbers because the Social Security Administration is not issuing new numbers and cards during the Tea Party shutdown. Now, these farmers are Republicans, Democrats, Independents. They don't want to play politics. They want to play by the rules. And they can't understand why the Tea Party is playing politics with their business. It's resulting in farmers needing to pay huge amounts of backup withholding taxes, which they otherwise wouldn't have needed to do if their workers had been able to acquire Social Security numbers. And farmers needing new H-2A workers are being stymied in the application process since the Department of Labor is not administering necessary parts of that process thanks to the artificial, made in Congress, Tea Party shutdown. And the ripple effects of the shutdown are spreading ominously outward across Vermont and every other state. Now, I spoke about just one aspect of agriculture. My colleagues who represent all parts of this country could talk about a whole lot of other aspects of agriculture. That's just one multi-billion-dollar industry across this country that is being hurt and ultimately being devastated. Some will go out of business, all because of the Tea Party shutdown. And all with problems that can be solved right now. They can be solved this afternoon. So let's stop the shameful politicking. House should end the shutdown. Just vote on a Senate-passed continuing resolution. After all, it adds the numbers they in the House asked for. All they have to do is keep their word. We in the Senate did. Now it's time for them to. Mr. President, I see no one else seeking recognition.